All right, I did the thing. I saw the two movies that everyone was talking about, being Barbie and Oppenheimer, and I did see them on the same day. So we're going to talk about them, mainly Barbie, because I feel like I have a lot more to say about Barbie than Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, I feel like, is kind of what you expect, and Barbie was that to a sense, but we'll get there. So mainly talk about Barbie and then get a little into Oppenheimer. So, Barbie. This movie had a lot of hype, I guess, going into it, a crazy marketing campaign, and was a movie about Barbie, directed by Greta Gerwig, who, if you don't know, she did Lady Bird and then Little Women, both movies that I think are great. Lady Bird especially is a film that I think is like extremely stellar. I think it's super well written. I think it has great characters. And I actually just rewatched it a couple months ago, and it has so many like subtle character building moments that are just great. And I love like coming of age stories. I just think Lady Bird is like a very well written piece of media. Bringing us to Barbie, let's get into it. The movie starts with a fun little 2001 parody, which I think was also in one of the trailers or something. And at that point, it's kind of funny because I've heard people talk about what the target audience is for this movie. And obviously it's doing extremely well. I think women and girls of all ages are pretty much going to see it. I don't really know who it's being marketed at specifically. I don't know if a bunch of parents are taking their like little kids to see this movie or like little girls. So I don't really know, but it is funny because a lot of references and jokes are obviously going to go over kids' heads that are very meant for adults. Not even this. I mean, this is, whoever is the crowd that's going to be seeing this, but also knows 2001. I know plenty of the people in the theater probably didn't even know what was going on when this happened. Either way, I'm glad it was there because I got a kick out of it. And that was a fun joke. I didn't think too much about it. Then the movie gets into it. We're introduced to the Barbieland, and I think the first 20 minutes or so of this movie are very cool. The production design on this movie is insane. It's so like obviously so many different Barbie like play sets and stuff, and everything is like, pink obviously, but it's just a very visually pleasing movie to look at. And I think the way they kind of incorporated this, like, I'll kind of do a couple comparisons to the Lego movie, but the same thing where they like throw you in this world at the beginning and everything is just stylized so well to the point where like you're in it. You like believe everything that's happening and you're like, okay, I'm in like the Barbie land right now. And there's a bunch of references, like I said, to the playsets and stuff. And we're also introduced to our main characters being the main stereotypical Barbie played by Margot Robbie and then the main Ken played by Ryan Gosling, who I'll probably say this a few times, but he was phenomenal. He was like really funny. There was like dancing scenes at the beginning. He's just like he just kills it. I think is the best part of the movie. He does such a good job. Michael Cera's in it. Being Michael Cera, you might get a kick out of it because it's Michael Cera, but then I think there's some parts later that he's not super necessary. So either way, Barbie's life starts, going wrong. She's like, why are my feet flat? All this stuff, blah blah blah. She meets the weird Barbie played by Kate McKinnon, who I don't usually like in a lot of stuff, and she's fine in this movie. I didn't mind her. I kind of like the idea of like the weird Barbie. But yeah, that's kind of the setup for the movie. So her and Ken go into the real world to figure out who's playing with Barbie and see see if she can get her issues fixed or whatever. And then when they get into the real world is kind of where the movie starts and where it started losing me. So we'll talk more about the like, I don't want to say political, but like what this movie's trying to say thematically and yeah, socially, politically, however you want to spin it. But they get into the world and immediately you can tell it's a very like, at least my interpretation, it's a very exaggerated, over the top, like, version of reality that it's presenting. There's like super over the top, like sexism, like give us a smile, Blondie, like that kind of stuff that, guys being bad to women, which is something that'll come up a lot in this movie, but it's shown here in what I first took as a male watching this in a very over-the-top, cartoonish, exaggerated way. When that was happening, was I like, oh, this is good, this is bad? I just was like, all right, it's doing the like, oh, but I was just surprised that it was like immediately right when it started so like in your face, over the top, like not like just exaggerated. So that's what that is. But there's this great little scene where she just sits there, and I almost think this scene should be later in the movie, and I think they should have done a lot of stuff thematically differently than the way they did. But in itself, I think it's a great scene. No dialogue really, just her observing the human world, humans, like all these different things. And then she tells this woman that she's so beautiful. And I think it's a really like great moment. And it's kind of this idea of like, I mean, you can take it a couple of different ways. You can take it as this idea of like, women being empowered by themselves and like empowering, kind of setting these standards for their own beauty and not needing to conform to these ideas of beauty set by Barbie. And like this woman, her being different and not, like a Barbie, quote unquote, because that's all that Margot Robbie's Barbie is known, then her being not that makes her beautiful, like in her own way. That's thematically what that's kind of setting up. I don't think the film really follows through with that in any interesting way, but that's what this going on in this scene. I like the idea and the way it's done just in this scene. So yeah, that's what's going on in the real world. She makes her way to this school. She meets this girl who we also had seen is this little girl in these flashbacks, or I guess just, flashbacks that showing Margot Robbie's Barbie who's playing with her. So this girl named Sasha, she goes off and tells Barbie about how she makes little girls feel terrible, and she's a representation of like sexualized capitalism and unrealistic physical ideals and all these things that, again, that's a topic to dive into in this movie, but the way you set that up isn't with a teenage character talking not how a teenager talks. It once again was just like, whoa, like calm down a second. Someone behind the camera, like writing the screenplay for this, is just talking directly to me. And maybe it was the delivery, maybe it was the line itself. I think it was both, but the way it came across from that actress was just like cringe, which I don't like using that word a lot, but I did throughout a few times this movie. I was like, ooh, I was like, we're really doing that. So I didn't love that scene, and I didn't love how that was written. Again, taking like what Barbie represents and the history of its representation and how it's made girls feel, obviously a topic you want to tackle in this Barbie movie written by Greta Gerwig. But I hate how the first like kind of mention of it is this little monologue this girl gives, and I was just like, that kind of turned me off. So yeah, as they're walking around doing all the stuff in the real world, Ken realizes that people respect him in this world because obviously all he knows is the Barbie world where he's basically like an object, he's just used there. So then he goes into this world where women are just objects, and he's like, okay, well, I'm a man. People like respect me here. And then he goes to all these places kind of thinking he can just get a job because he's a man, but then they don't let him, which again, I did like that because this movie, I wouldn't say is very, discreet or subtle or nuanced about anything, but I did like that this was like, kind of like all right, just because you're a man, you still can't do anything you want. But again, I still think that clashes with the kind of overly cartoonish, super hyper sexism stuff that we had saw before. So yeah, like this one guy that he goes to says, yeah, we're still doing patriarchy, but we're just hiding it a little bit better. Or like something like that. I was like, what? So Sasha, the girl from earlier, goes to her mom, Gloria, and just to kind of set the time for this, their first real scene together is about 45 minutes into the movie. And it's established they have like a strained relationship, The daughter hates the mom for whatever reason. Probably she thinks she's like lame or not cool or whatever. That's just like the surface level reading you would get on that. So we'll come back to those characters. Barbie goes to Mattel, or she's really taken by them. We meet the CEO, played by Will Ferrell, who does have some funny moments in this. I'm not usually like a huge Will Ferrell fan. I don't think he's the funniest guy ever, but he's got some movies and some roles that I think are funny, and I think he serves his role fine here. I think when they're in the human world, he does what he needs to do, but as we'll discuss, as the movie goes on, he does not need to be there at all. So yeah, Barbie escapes the Mattel office because she doesn't want to go in the box. She runs into the creator of Barbie, Ruth's ghost, who we later learn lives on the 17th floor of the building, I guess. And she says Barbie looks just right, even though she's not perfect. So yeah, once again, kind of establishing stuff with those standards of beauty. So yeah, we get this car chase with Gloria, Sasha, and Barbie, and we learn that Gloria, the mom, was actually the one that's been playing with Barbie because she's been lonely and she's been having all these thoughts of death and blah, blah, blah. That's why Barbie's life got messed up in Barbieland. So yeah, they all go back. And I didn't mention this before, but when I was talking about the production design, I love like when they are traveling between the real world and the Barbie land, they have all these like physical backdrops, like physical props of these like all the backgrounds and stuff they're interacting with, and these like what I assume are real like Barbie sets of like the way they travel. It's all this stuff that I was super cool. And I think they do it like 6 times in the movie. But the first time and like the second it happened, I was just like kind of mesmerized by how it looked. And I thought that was so cool. So yeah, they go back to Barbieland, all three of them. And Ken has now learned the patriarchy since he's been in the real world. And he has now turned Barbieland into, I think, Kendom is what it's called. But I did want to mention one thing. When they are going on the way there, this is after Barbie has seen the human world, and she mentions that Ken is superfluous and that, he's unnecessary, not really needed. That is a line that she has when they're on the way back to Barbieland. So, also there's a scene where we see the Mattel board of directors and Will Ferrell are still following them. So yeah, now Ken has turned Barbieland into the patriarchy. And I don't really know exactly how this is, like, how exactly all the women have been brainwashed. I guess they just have been because he came back with these ideas of patriarchy and got all the Kens on board, obviously, and then that brainwashed all of the Barbies, but not weird Kate McKinnon Barbie because she's like not really a Barbie. I'm not sure. If someone knows the mechanics of that, let me know. But yeah, Barbie talks to Ken and he talks about how in the real world, people respected him, like we already talked about. Unlike Barbieland, where he's just, his role is there to be an accessory to Barbie. And I'll say it again, Ryan Gosling in all of these scenes is just so charming. And I just, every time he was on screen, it was just cracking me up. So there's a reveal that there's going to be a vote to change the constitution of Barbieland to Kendom or whatever. And Barbie's obviously distraught about this, and she says, I'm just going to give up. And Sasha says Barbie's exactly what she thought she would be like, because she doesn't like Barbie. She thinks they don't, encourage strong women. She thinks they're weak and sexualize capitalism, all this stuff. So that makes sense that she would feel that way. And then Sasha and her mom, they're like, all right, we're just going to leave and go back to the real world and leave Barbie to do her own thing. And it's revealed that Michael Cera's character named Alan, I think, is hiding in the car with them. And we get a scene where he fights a bunch of construction workers who are building a wall so people can't leave or get into the Barbieland / Kendom. And this was kind of funny. I mean, Michael Cera, once again, is kind of a hoot, but it really didn't amount to much. And then during this fight scene, Sasha's like, oh, actually, we need to go back and help Barbie. And she gives this whole thing about how her mom's drawings are actually cool and dark and weird and crazy and just like what her mom pretends not to be. And then Gloria repeats it and she's like, oh, I'm actually cool, dark. And I was just like, I just felt nothing in this scene because it's so quick. It's been like 35 minutes since we first met these characters. And the way, again, maybe it's just the delivery, but the way it's written with her being like, I'm weird and I'm dark and I'm crazy. Like, I just thought it was, once again, kind of cringe. And I was like, ugh. Like, I was not a fan of these characters throughout the film. So they go back to the weird Barbie house, and there's a bunch of discontinued Barbies there, which, again, is kind of cool references to stuff that I'm sure Barbie mega fans will be all over. The way I was over stuff, if you watch my Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse review. Yeah, they go back, and Barbie's still sad. And she's like, once again, she's like, I'm not stereotypical Barbie pretty. And there's this fun little meta line about, like, maybe don't cast Margot Robbie. Like, I think I'm okay with that meta line. I think that one, I mean, it is true. But again, it's like, I think it was Ready Player One where that woman was casted as the female, protagonist or whatever in that film. And she's like, don't look at me, I have this birthmark. And then it's like, just a small like birthmark or something, but she's still like a beautiful actress. So it's kind of similar to that, where obviously they did cast like the most beautiful woman on the planet to play Barbie, which makes sense, but it is funny now that, they're poking fun at it, but I don't think it's like, well, don't cast her in the first place, because you are casting a Barbie, and I think Margot Robbie, I mean, she does a great job in this movie, as she always does. And I just think if you're casting an actress to play Barbie, I think Margot Robbie fits. So I thought that was a fun little line. But yeah, Barbie says she's not smart and not good enough and can't do all these extraordinary things like be a pilot or be a, all these different things. And then the mom responds with this whole monologue about how hard it is to be a woman. And I get it. Me talking about this right now, I'm obviously not the target demographic for that. She's not talking, to something that I would have any personal experience like understanding. And it sounds like this little speech she's giving or she gave is like hitting home with a lot of women. I saw this movie with a girl and we were talking about it after and she was like, "Oh, that stuff is true." And I was like, "Well, shoot, I don't know." Like, I mean, I guess it is. Like, I don't, that's not something that I can really speak to. And that's what makes, everyone's subjective experiences with art interesting. But for me, I cannot stand in any story, no matter what, like, the point being made is, when a character is just, like, a mouthpiece for the thoughts of the creator. It just is so, like, transparent. And there are ways to, like, work this into a scene in, like, a film and to, like, the dialogue that can meaningfully, like, add to characterization and just be natural in the film without being a literal, like, "I'm Gloria, I'm gonna stand up, let me give my speech moment, this is how hard it is to be a woman." Again, the content of the speech, like, it has resonated with a lot of people, which is important, but I don't think that's how you write that. And I just came across as very transparent, very preachy, very just like I was just being talked to aggressively by Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach. Both of which, once again, are writers that I love. Marriage Story, I think, is a phenomenal film. But again, I just hate when any kind of film does that. And the fact that this little speech she gives is the literal solution to fixing the brainwashing is kind of funny. So just whatever. Also, right when this is done, there's the Snyder Cut joke, which I did hear was in the movie, about the patriarchy, I guess, and I thought it was cringe. And there's also a moment where, like, when this Barbie that's played by Alexandra Shipp, she says the dumb Snyder Cut joke, and then Weird Barbie's like, she's back, like, as if the audience can figure that out on their own. Again, like, I feel like someone would say the excuse, like, "Oh, it's a Barbie movie for kids," but there's also plenty of stuff in this movie that, like, isn't for kids. So I don't think something like that line is entirely necessary. And it's also something that plenty of films are, like, guilty of. Just these lines and scenes where it's like, yes, like, they're just literally just saying that to the audience to, like, lay it down that that's what just happened. Anyways, Barbie then says that, like, she has this line where she says, "By giving voice to the cognitive dissonance required to be a woman under the patriarchy, you robbed it of its power." And then there's this line she says about, "Oh, did I just say that?" Classic, like, dumb modern screenwriting, like, say dumb line and the character acknowledges the line is dumb. Same thing with just, they do that. I was like, whatever. And then Sasha's like, "Hell yeah, white savior Barbie." And then again, I don't think that's, like, a particularly funny line. I just think maybe it's the delivery again from this actress, but I just thought it was, like, kind of cringe. And this entire scene was just full of moments where I was like, like, these, and, like, they're not that offensive. Like, I wasn't like, "Oh, this is, like, awful" or anything, but I was just like, are we really making all these, like, kind of cringe, like, I just was not a fan of how a lot of the scene was written. Then we get this little montage of all the Barbies distracting the Kens by being women and then getting men to do things that men do, like mansplain, like Photoshop to women and talk about, like, financial advice and how good The Godfather is, which, yeah, that's kind of funny. Like, I get it. I love movies. I'm a film guy, but those people do exist. However, once again, this kind of thing is just so, like, heavy-handed, so, like, exaggerated. And I just felt like it was trying too hard to make these, like, yeah, let's make fun of these dudes in the patriarchy that, like, talk about how good The Godfather is, but, like, no one cares. Like, it's kind of hard to judge because it's a tough thing to judge. But I don't love, once again, the way that this film decided to just blatantly, like, just make this kind of joke about it. It just felt like so, like I said, like, it was trying too hard. Once again, like, how to show them women how to play sports and financial advice and just a scene like that. So all of the Kens are being distracted. And then Barbie agrees to be Ken's girlfriend, and he plays the guitar at her. And once again, this, like, scene where all the different Kens are playing that dumb song for the Barbies was fun. Like, it was funny. I visually loved how it looked with, like, all the fires. Again, like, everything physically, production design, like, on an aesthetic level in this movie is great. And then all the Barbies switch Kens, and they make all the Kens jealous against each other. And then I don't know. So the Kens decide, like, all right, we're going to go to war against the other Kens that I guess now have the Barbies, but I don't know exactly how the distinction is made, because the way it's edited, I also think was like kind of like confusing at first, because they're all on the beach, like with the different Barbies, and then Simu Liu, who is I haven't even mentioned his name, but he's the like main antagonist Ken for our protagonist Ryan Gosling Ken. And I guess the distinction is just like, it's not clear which Kens are like on which side. I guess it's just the Kens who got left against the Kens who the Barbies went to, but there was never a scene of like, all three of those like main Kens that are on like the Ryan Gosling Ken side, like all being left empty at the end. I just felt the way this whole thing like went down was kind of like when it was happening in the movie, I was like, it didn't completely like come across as seamless and as like clear as I think it should have. Like, it's fine, it's not a huge issue or anything. It just like the way these couple minutes of footage were cut together, I think could have been a little bit cleaner and a little bit more clear. So yeah, they are about to fight, and we get this little musical sequence, which by itself I do love. I think the song's really catchy. Ryan Gosling once again is so good in this scene. I love this little like fight they're doing, and then it turns into an actual musical scene where it's just funny, and like once again the song is good. I love the way aesthetically it looks, and it was just also overly ridiculous, which was what I loved about it. It felt like something that you should do in a Barbie movie with like toys and a toy set, and just like abandon reality and do this crazy dance scene. And it transitions to Ken's being, they come united and they're saying they're just Ken and they're enough. And the Kens are all like, yeah, we're enough. We're Ken. And that's, I do like this because it shows they're coming together in their patriarchy, doing something not stereotypically masculine with this little, musical dance sequence. I like the idea of that. But also, they were just fighting, and now they decided to come together over the course of the song. And it very much is like, all right, they were like, we're fighting for a sec, and now they're here. And it was literally over the course of like 3 minutes, maybe. And I think the idea of these warring Kens coming together over this musical thing could have been really cool, like an actual musical scene with like a back and forth, maybe with like different lines that Simu Liu like sings or says, and then Ryan Gosling like sings something, and then they go into this final part where they're all united, like, we're Ken under the patriarchy and that kind of thing. And he's talking about how he still like wants Barbie's love and all this stuff. So where his character's at right now is pretty much still just being united with the other Kens, but still needing to be with Barbie and still needing to be, be with her and, not own her, but be with her as a person of the patriarchy is what I guess you could say his character was at right now. So yeah, also the Mattel people, every like once in a while there will be a quick scene with them. They show back up for a second during this fight, and it's like, by this point I'd forgotten they were in the movie, and I was like, okay, how are they going to work them into like some kind of, conclusion with this movie? But they don't. The Barbies then vote, and yay, Barbieland is back to normal. And Ken is, of course, devastated about this because they were too busy fighting that they let the Barbies all go and vote. And then we get this scene where Barbie says that she's sorry for taking Ken for granted, and Ken says he doesn't know who he is without Barbie, and Barbie suggests that Ken isn't just his beach, or he isn't just Barbie's accessory, that he's just Ken, and that's enough. And this kind of conclusion scene is some of my biggest issues with this movie, because the entire ending with Ken doesn't feel earned, and I don't think it was properly built up to. There's not a scene with Barbie realizing earlier in the movie that how she treated Ken had been unfair. Once again, she still said, even after coming back from the real world, that he was superfluous. There's no moment there where she sees how the women of the real world are treated, and she's like, oh, this is how I've been treating Ken. Maybe, like, make this movie a little bit more nuanced. Maybe, like, no one's perfect, and everyone of both genders is like susceptible to selfish behavior and like an unfair power balance, or like something like that. It was so easy to just have like a quick scene where she sees something like that and then like thinks for a second. But that wasn't in the film. She just apologizes to Ken and then he, accepts her apology pretty much, and then they have this little conversation about, Ken's own thing as well. But her relationship to him, I just don't think was explored enough from her perspective at all, because, well, we'll get into this other stuff in a second. So yeah, she just kind of apologizes because that's what, she's had this realization now, but we don't see the character growth with her happen. We don't it's not tangibly experienced, I feel like, to the point where that feels like an earned action that she should do. And same thing with this idea of Ken needing to be his own person. That's an arc that makes sense and is obvious from the start of the film when you're watching it, when she's like, oh, it's girls' night, every night's girls' night, and then he's just kind of left out. And then she even says before at the end of the film, she's like, maybe not every night needed to be girls' night. But the way that his kind of self-realization is done is just kind of lazy. It's thrown in right at the end with these things that she tells him, and he's just like, you're right, I'm Ken. And then all the other Kens are like, I'm just Ken, I'm just Ken, I'm just Ken. And he goes down the slide and he's like, I'm Ken. It's just accepted by everyone. And it just really bothered me, because this idea of men not needing to conform to these ideas and purpose of materialistic value are great ones to explore. But the film just has Barbie say a surface level hint, but she's like, you're not your beach, which is that idea itself can be it can do a little bit more. That's not, you didn't explore this idea. It's just the film just has her say it, Ken accepts it, as opposed to either one of them experiencing or seeing things in the human world that support this character change. There was more of Barbie's growth about women, being beautiful by themselves, or being more independent, or being able to do more things that they were just shown to do in Barbie. That's what Barbie experienced in the human world. But there was nothing about her relationship with Ken other than just, I don't have to be with him, that she learned in the human world. Maybe have a scene of Barbie when she's in the human world at the beginning, see a man with his family or something, or being independent by himself, and have that change Barbie's perspective of the Kens, and have them maybe have them both maybe see something when they're in the real world that plants this idea in Barbie's head and in Ken's head that she can bring up later. She can be remember the blah 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 that makes Ken remember that he actually can be his own Ken, and he doesn't have to just be an accessory to Barbie. I think that's how you do this arc, and I think that would have been a lot more effective and a lot more meaningful than how they actually did it in the movie. Now, I'm sure they didn't really do this because this is primarily a feminist-esque, I'll say, movie, but I also feel like I heard before the movie was coming out that it explores gender roles kind of on both sides, and this movie isn't just anti-men, it doesn't just hate men, it isn't just pro-women, but it really doesn't explore these ideas, about the stuff that we just talked about when it comes to Ken. It explores some ideas about women's perspective on their role in society and these, imposed standards of beauty. That's what the film, kind of has different scenes exploring. And I think that's what it mainly should have, focused on in a way where it had a more fitting through line that we'll get to in a sec. But then it just tries to kind of tack on these ideas about, male independence at the end, which is fine if you don't want to focus that much on it in a Barbie movie, but it just needs a scene or two, and I think that would have had the end hit a lot more. That's not, the way they just tack it on isn't exploring anything. That's just having a character say an idea and the other character accepting that. So that was disappointing, and there's just so much more that, once again, I think could have been done with this concept. And the Kens, after the Barbies have got back control of Barbieland, the Kens want a position in the president's cabinet, and she's like, you can start with a lower position, and then the narrator comes on again with another fourth wall break and is like, maybe the Kens will one day have as much power as women do in the real world. Again, I get the humor behind this idea. It's funny. All the girls I've talked to have been like, that's so true. I get the humor behind it. But I also, as another kind of fourth wall break, thought it was kind of cringe. And it also just kind of feels disconnected from Barbie going to the real world and seeing how one, group was completely in power and basically rules everything. And then she just comes back, and it feels like Barbie should say, hey guys, I've actually been to a world that's really similar to ours and it's extremely flawed. Maybe we should try and like change it, not just go back to, women being completely in control of of everything. Which again, they're not completely in control of everything, because I guess they did say that they would get the lower position. But like, again, I get the humor in it, but it just also felt like, I don't know. I almost felt like Barbie, after seeing what she saw in the human world, wouldn't do that. Or maybe she would, because she sees how bad men are in the real world. So she's like, we're going to keep them, not subjugated. We're going to keep them, off doing their own thing. And the women will be running the world in Barbieland. So it's just back to Barbieland at the end. The guys can have a, small cabinet, or not a cabinet. They can have some small, like, other government position. And now the Kens are just, they know they're Ken. They don't need Barbie anymore. But again, like we already talked about, that wasn't from anything that felt meaningfully built up to in the film. Also, by this point, the Mattel people are still here with Will Ferrell, and they offer absolutely nothing. They just take up time where, I feel like it could have been better spent. And then Barbie's like, I'm not sure where I belong anymore. The adventure's over. And Ruth, the ghost, comes in from earlier, and she takes her to some white, like, void purgatory thingy, and she's like, they have this little conversation that I actually really enjoyed. It played some, like, sweet, emotionally touching music, and Barbie, like, they talk about kind of being human, and Barbie asks for permission to become human, and Ruth says, you don't need my permission to do this, but I also kind of make this, like, beauty through line and, like, theme, like, have a little bit more resonance throughout the film. I think they could have maybe added a line where Ruth is like, some line where she's like, you don't need my permission to be beautiful or something. Like, I think that is a line that could have kind of given a through line to this, beauty, standards of beauty arc that she has. But it kind of feels like at this point it's going on to something else about being human, I guess, at this point. And then she's like, all right, I'm going to be human. So it kind of gives this little, like, nostalgic montage sort of thing, which I assume is supposed to be like Barbie's feelings and emotions of, like, kind of growing up and being human. And I like the music during this scene. I like, the way it's edited. I think the scene, once again, just the scene itself is effective. And it's nice, but I can't also help but feel how this also could have been better. What if, like, this moment turned into a celebration about, like kind of a culmination of how these gender roles had been explored throughout the film, and, like, how it, like, comes together to contribute to, like, what it means to be human. What if, like, earlier in the movie, Barbie saw, like, a dad or something, like, pushing his daughter on a swing, and then that, that could kind of contribute to the arc of making Ryan Gosling's Ken feel like he's not just there for Barbie or something. And then it also could have come back in the montage and kind of pulled those threads together in a way that kind of, makes it, like, kind of ties it together, makes it a little bit more meaningful, that, like, what Barbie really learned on this adventure is really sticking with her and will continue to stick with her as she becomes a human. I think some idea like that could have, like, really pulled it together, and, like, just, I think a lot of that could have been more tightly woven together thematically than it definitely was. So yeah, anyways, now she's human and she goes to see her gynecologist, and it's a little joke, and that's the end of the movie. So yeah, that was Barbie, and I enjoyed this, kind of. Now that I'm talking about it out loud, I think, like, when I left the theater, I was like, yeah, it was good, but I've got some issues. But now, like, there's still a lot of stuff I liked, but I mean, there are definitely a few things that when it ended didn't feel right, and I think I was able to nail down a little bit what they are now, or a little bit, or at least, like, talk about them a little bit more. The performances were great. Production design was incredible, like I already said. And the Barbie sections at the beginning were great. Like, I loved all the actors that they had playing, like, the Barbies and the Kens. Had a really fun style to it. There were some good laughs throughout. And there were a few moments where I feel like Greta Gerwig's usual, like, stellar writing, like, shines through. And there are some, like, ideas that I feel like have these, like, really human moments. Not to, human. Obviously, she's becoming human at the end. But, like, that scene, like, although it does feel kind of, like, nostalgic-y, like, I think that scene accomplishes what it sets out to do. And there's a few moments throughout that I really like the idea of. I just feel like it gets overshadowed by like, all these different moments where I was like groaning or just like cringing at parts of this movie. And it is so preachy and so in your face with these ideas that I don't even, I'm not even saying I disagree with the politics of the movie or anything super aggressively. I just hated how they were implemented and said and so over the top and exaggerated and in your face. And like it was trying too hard just from the characters. There's just like plenty of lines I can't really get over. And even setting all that aside, I don't think the character work when it came to the stuff with Ken, especially at the end, and Ken and Barbie's relationship, really came together at all in a way that felt earned. And then there's stuff like the Sasha and her mom development that also wasn't earned. And then there's the wasted like time with the Will Ferrell Mattel people. It just, I don't know. I still enjoyed it overall, but I've definitely got some issues. And I just think this especially could have been so much like a Barbie movie written by Greta Gerwig. I was like, she's going to make that something really special. If I was like, whenever they announced this movie years ago, when I heard that Greta Gerwig was making a Barbie movie, I was like, she's going to turn that into some really special, like, take on, probably like gender and like beauty and, whatever, like capitalism, I guess, because it's Barbie. But like, I expected her to do something really crazy with it, or else why else would she, take a Barbie movie? But I feel like it ended up just being more scenes of characters saying these like ideas that she has about it, but they're just saying it out loud. Not only that, but the delivery of these lines once again came across as kind of cringe to me. But obviously that's just my opinion. But yeah, I still enjoyed it. Decent movie overall. I still liked it, but I've got some issues, and I just kind of wish it was a little bit better. I also saw Oppenheimer. Like I said, I don't have nearly as much to say, actually, because I loved it, and I thought it was fantastic. And one of the best made films on a technical level that I have seen in quite a while. So performances are probably the biggest standout for me in this movie, because so much of it is just like dialogue with these actors. Cillian Murphy is like, I don't want to say like haunting. He's like incredible. There's like a lot of very subtle moments, but there's, especially in like the last third of the film, like a lot of close-ups on his face where either due to the way it's shot or the score in the background or little visual cues, you know exactly what he's feeling. Emily Blunt as well. I haven't seen her in anything, I guess, in a while. Emily Blunt was really good as well, especially in that like interrogation scene at the end with Jason Clarke, who also, this is like the best performance I've ever seen from him. He was so intense, so good. But Robert Downey Jr. is maybe my most like surprising one, especially once again, that last third. He is so like just engaging and so like believable as that character. And I never really thought that he would be able to separate himself from, like the Iron Man role so much, but he did an incredible job. Matt Damon as well was also just, as usual, a very reliable actor. He had some nice moments of levity too, which I appreciated. But another thing I really liked about this movie is that it immediately gripped me. Like, I knew I'd be in for the 3-hour runtime, and it was kind of frustrating at first because it was a lot of, jumping around to all these different events. But every scene that they jumped to, I was so hooked in, especially the ones with Cillian Murphy at the beginning. And it was just me trying to pay attention to everything going on, and it was incredible. And the way this film was structured also kind of greatly works to its benefit, I would say, more and more as the story goes on. You don't really realize the significance of like these moments, like his talk with Einstein, or their conversation about the H-bomb, or the hearing about the isotopes, like all these different pieces that kind of start fitting together once, the pieces start putting together at the end with like Strauss and everything. And Alden Ehrenreich as well was also really good in this movie and worked well as like kind of an insert for the audience, like learning all these things about Robert Downey Jr.'s character. And it is, this film is a lot. Like, it's 3 hours of pretty much nonstop dialogue, and it can be pretty hard to make sure you're like gathering all the information about everything in each scene. But that's also what I surprisingly really enjoyed about this, because it's always done in a very exciting and a very engaging way. Like, I'm really looking forward to rewatching this movie because, especially of how all these like little scenes of all these things coming together, they just work well that like by the end I was extremely satisfied with this. And I also loved how like, this film was so dedicated to showing everything from Oppenheimer's perspective. And it doesn't, obviously paint this very real person as infallible or even a morally good figure, but I think it does a really good job in giving context to plenty of his actions and how, this context affected them. It kind of puts you in his mindset, at least from his perspective, like, as well as it can. Like, the scenes where they're slowly getting closer and closer to understanding the science of them just have this, like, really great, thrilling aspect to them because you know exactly what's coming. And that's also just the benefit of doing, like, a historical drama like this, where obviously you know the impending doom of something terrible like the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like, that's coming. And just watching the gradual build up to that it's intense. And I don't want to say thrilling, but you're gripped to your seat. You're like, when are they going to do this? And how are they going to react when they see the results of this thing they've created? There's just an inherent, interesting aspect of this. The score as well for this movie was also fantastic, and there is a lot of it. It's actually funny just how many scenes have the score, like, pretty loudly playing over it, but I just found it to be effective in the way it does it. And all the different parts of, like, the cut-ins of the atoms and different explosions, as Oppenheimer talks about it either adds to, like, the dread or horror or just, like, importance or scientific, like, greatness and breakthrough of what's happening. And then when the bomb finally does go off during the Trinity test scene, it is incredible. My theater was, like, silent when the lack of audio happens, and then the explosion hits and the audio hits as well. It's just a thrilling theater experience is really all I can say. The last hour was great. And I also want to mention the scene where Oppenheimer, it's like during the rally after the bombs were dropped, and he's seeing all the, like, visuals of what the people looked like, as they were turned to ash pretty much instantly. Like, it was, like, some horrific stuff. And it also made some of, like, the hearing scenes at the end with the two different hearings going on some of the most gripping moments I have seen in a while. They start intercutting, like, even more. And the final one was just, what can I even say? It was just, like, so intense and such effective visual storytelling, especially with parts at the end. And when this movie's over, you feel like you have watched and experienced, like, an epic tale of history by the end. And it ends on this, like, haunting final line. And I was, like, not hyped, but I was just into it. Like, I was filled with all this, like, dread, and I was like, oh my God. So yeah, I just want to mention a few things about this movie because nearly everything I think is pretty great about it. And every scene has the same great things about it. It has, like, engaging dialogue, like, great performances, and then a very well implemented use of sound. For the most part. It's not like Tenet where I couldn't hear anything. There's a few moments where this audio mixing was like, but no, it's not like the beginning of Tenet where I literally have never seen it again and I don't know what they say for the first, like, 20 minutes of that movie. So yeah, this film just continues doing what Nolan's great at. He takes these, like, crazy world-bending scientific, like, ideas and is able to boil them down and present them to an audience with great dialogue by engaging actors in a way that the general public is able to understand, and people are actually going out in droves to see this movie. Like, this was the most packed theater I have been in since Spider-Man No Way Home. Granted, I saw in IMAX, which, by the way, you definitely should if you haven't, but yeah, this was the most packed theater I have been in years, and I couldn't believe it was for this 3-hour rated R, like, history drama that doesn't have any, action in it, really. I think it's just Christopher Nolan's name and the subject matter that really has, there's something about it that has people hooked. And I just really enjoyed it. I'm glad that Nolan finally got back to making, like, a story with characters, because I love Christopher Nolan, but his past couple movies have really been lacking in, like, strong characters for me. Like, that was my biggest issue with Tenet. Honestly, I don't remember Dunkirk too much, but I remember not being fully invested in the characters. But I miss the days of the characters like, Matthew McConaughey in Interstellar. Well, that movie has other issues, but I think, that's a strong part of it. Or, like, Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale in The Prestige, or Leonardo DiCaprio in Inception. Like, all these, like, strong characters. And this movie is clearly so focused on the character of Oppenheimer and his subjective perception of everything that I think it made for such a strong experience, especially viewing these grand historical events in that context. So, yeah, I really enjoyed Oppenheimer. See it if you haven't. Very, very good movie. I honestly, maybe not, I don't know. I haven't decided if it's one of Nolan's best yet, but definitely one of the best movies I've seen this year. Probably the best, other than Spider-Verse for me. But yeah, go see it. Go see both these. Form your own opinions. Let me know what you think about both these films below, and I'll see you next time.